Good morning, good afternoon to the people that join us today. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to another session of UNAM UK Student Seminar Series, an initiative designed to enlighten Mexican student academic and scientific work in Mexico and abroad. We are delighted to have you join us in this online space where we continue to foster connection between academics, community from an international, interdisciplinary, and collaborative perspective. To begin today's session, I am pleased to introduce Farid Bustos, President of the Mexican Society of Students in the United Kingdom, who will be the moderator for this seminar. Please, Farid, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Del Rio. It is a pleasure to be here today with you all and to collaborate with the UNAM United Kingdom or UNAM UK Center in hosting this session. We are honored to welcome Michelle Ahued, who will be presenting the talk entitled Public Development Policies Between Cooperation and Colonization. Very briefly, in this talk, Michelle will critically examine certain development policies promoted by international organizations that may reproduce colonial frameworks and silence traditional governance systems. She will also explore alternative approaches to more inclusive, context-sensitive, and intellectual cooperation. Before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce our guest speaker, Michelle, who is a lawyer trained at the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México, or ITAM. She holds a master's degree in public policy from Brunel University of London, and she has also completed academic programs at prestigious institutions including Sciences Po Paris, Sciences Po Toulouse, the London School of Economics, LSE, Harvard University, Ahued University, and Tecnológico Monterrey. She has worked across diverse sectors and the intersection of law policy and social justice. Her professional experience includes serving a legislative consultant legislative consultant at the Mexican Congress, contributing to the analysis and drafting of public policy proposals. She's also held a position of Deputy Director of the Legislative Studies at the Ministry of Infrastructure, Communications, Transport of Mexico. She's focused on regulatory frameworks related to the national infrastructure development. And in the private sector, she's worked at González Calvillo, one of Mexico's leading law firms specializing in legal analysis, strategic legislative advising. In academia, she's collaborated with Dr. Luis Monte, a distinguished engineer and policy expert at ITAM, on research projects related to public policy and development. Currently, Michelle serves as a legal advisor for a community interest companies based in London. She's focusing on migration and labor law with particular emphasis on advocating for the rights of Latin American immigrants in the UK. And Michelle, we're truly grateful for your time here and generosity. Please go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for Grecia, Antonio, and Farid for this space. So yes, today the conference will be about the myth of development in indigenous population. So I focused this subject in my thesis of master's that I just finished. So especially how so-called development policies often function as a modern form of colonialism, and how indigenous-led alternative offer powerful models for justice and sustainability. So it's how now the idea of international organization where has a programs in public policies in development in indigenous population. And after and in the end of the conference, I'm gonna offer powerful models already established for indigenous population of justice and sustainability. So I will begin with a question. What if the idea of development will be thought not as a solution, but as part of a problem? For decades, development has been framed as the answer to poverty, inequality, and marginalization. For many indigenous people, development has been displacement, land disposition, cultural erosion, and forced migration. Western development models have long been dominant in creative global policymaking and molding economic and social schemes. Nevertheless, those models frequently reproduce colonial power practices, reinforcing economic dependency, cultural displacement, and environment devastation. So in general, now we have seen since the Second War, some of the international institutions have developed this idea of introducing to the non-organized or not producing countries to get public policies in development, but in country, they assure the status quo. International treaties such as International Labour Organization, Convention 169, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, the World Bank Environment and Social Framework, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The indigenous people frameworks are shown as a protective mechanism of indigenous rights and safeguarding. Yet, in practice, the West has seen that the powerful state has used this organization to maintain a status quo and legitimate the invasion of indigenous territory, consolidating the Western overview of civilization. The concept of development has been questioned as a Western construction imposed to the goal of the global South, undervaluing different outlines of economic and organization model practices by native communities all around the globe. So now we're going to see the myth of development, how we see progress as industrialization, GDP growth, or foreign investment. The society of indigenous population is based on land conservation, collective ownership, and ancestral knowledge. Western development policies are idealized with the modern concept of capitalism, which is shaped by the global economy system. These policies are created to promote economic growth and modernization. The main objective of global development strategies relies on the progress model based on industrialization and economic markets. These perceptions maintain a long story of colonial and post-colonial policy and continue to affect indigenous people worldwide. During the colonial era, when European powers imposed their economic and political system on transcontinental territories, the idea of development policies were characterized by the systematic appropriation of indigenous land to the full industrialization growth. For example, the treaties made by the Native Americans were often violated, resources enforced relocating, loss of cultural heritage, and long-term socioeconomic disadvantage. In Australia, British colonialization conducted the dispossession of Aboriginal people, whose connection to the lands were diminished by policies aimed to assimilation and modernization. Development projects promoted by international financial institutions such as World Bank perpetuate these dynamics. There are some international agreements mentioned before, as the UNDRIP, the ILO Convention 169, and the World Bank, that sustain their role to protect and recognize indigenous people rights to self-determination, land, and participation in decision-making. Still, these policies seem frequently inclined to suit the power of the state's needs and corporate interests. Government administration and transnational organizations regularly influence the content of these treaties to justify wide-ranging development projects that intrude over indigenous territory. The UNDRIP, they did a project, an initiative that is FPIC, that stands for Free, Prior, and Informed Consent. It was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2007. That created specific right that recognize the local communities to give or withhold content to any project or activity that may affect their land, territory, or resources. However, its statute has non-binding statement, debilitates its implementations, allowing the state to interpret its provisions in matters that suits national interest. Canada and Australia were hostile to implement these UNDRIP initiatives, expressing worry about its implications for national sovereignty and resource management. This is strong belief that development discourse are the key to the economic expansion and the industrialization, and this will get directly to prosperity, is a dominant view of the 20th century theories, assuming that less developed nations should implement these models of the Western economies. Although this approach frequently entitles long-term effect of colonial exploitation, it allows Western powers to channel their effort in negotiation or even the arbitrary extraction of resources. The aberration to economic growth as a primary indicator of progress has often reinforced existing inequalities rather than addressing them. It is essential to point out how past colonialism shaped the economic and political outlook of growing colonialist nations, including the policies created to promote development. Many countries of the Global South have remained economically dependent on systems established during colonial rule. Maintaining these practices challenges standard narratives that show development has a correct ideology for modernization and economic prosperity. Instead, inequalities and structural limitations continue to hide real progress, raising questions about the effectiveness of development policies. Development ideologies impose a one-size-fits-all vision of modernity. It assumes indigenous people must catch up to the West instead of recognizing the legitimacy of their systems. So now we're gonna see a little bit of the legal framework that surround the indigenous right. So for giving a little bit of background, indigenous people live in all continents, from Arctic to Pacific, via Asia, Africa, and America. There is no singularity authoritative definition of indigenous people under international law and policy, and this is because it cannot be one definition. There is 476 million of people who recognize themselves as indigenous, living in 90 different countries with 5,000 distinct communities and 4,000 languages. They manage or hold tenure rights to approximately 1/4 of the world's surface area and have a significant portion of the world biodiversity. Nearly half of the Earth's protected areas and over half of the planet's remaining intact forests. International regulations concerning indigenous people are primarily guided by the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, established in 2007, and the ILO, Convention Concerning Indigenous and Tribal People. UNDRIP established a universal framework for the rights of indigenous people, while ILO 169, adopted in 1989, focused on protecting indigenous and tribal people from discrimination and ensuring their rights to development, customary laws, lands, territories, resources, employment, education, and health. The Convention of Biological Diversity of 1992, mainly through its Nagoya Protocol of 2010, seeks to ensure that indigenous knowledge of biodiversity and genetics resources are protected and the community receive fair benefits from their use. So I give you guys a paper where you can find a lot of these sources for you to consult. And if you need further information, just let me know. Domestically, there is 90 countries that recognize indigenous populations. Some countries have incorporated indigenous knowledge into their legal frameworks. In Ecuador, into the Constitution of 2008, explicitly recognizing indigenous knowledge as part of the national heritage. New Zealand Resource Management Act of 1991 interacts for Maori environmental principles such as Kaitiakitanga, which means guardianship, international conservation policies. In our country, Mexico, Article 1 recognizes the rights, identity, and culture of the indigenous community. These examples show that legal recognition of indigenous knowledge can support sustainable governance through implementation and collaborations. And in one hand is the recognition of the rights, and the other hand is the recognition of the knowledge. There is one system that is the Indigenous Knowledge System, IKS. It's a holistic system of understanding that includes practices, beliefs, and social structure developed over generation through interaction with the natural world. So this system, indigenous knowledge system, emphasize the interconnectivity of all living beings and the environment, unlike not the Western, that scientific Western approach is half understanding of the nature and of the way. So IKS are increasingly gaining recognition for the value in addressing global changes like climate change and biodiversity loss. This recognition is evident in international frameworks and agreements, including the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which acknowledge the vital role of indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge system contribute to sustainable development, but legal protection remain inconsistent. National policies recognizing indigenous knowledge most straight enforcement mechanisms from UNDRIP and the CBD. Studies have demonstrated remarkable resilience in preserving ecological knowledge, agricultural practices, and cultural transmission systems of indigenous community despite ongoing external pressures. Their food sovereignty and land preservation offer a sustainability alternative to modern exploitation models, emphasizing biodiversity conservation, communal governance, and integration and learning. The increasing threats of industrial expansion, land disposition, and the erosion of the traditional education system remark the urgent need for policies that recognize and protect their knowledge system. So now I'm going to speak a little bit about one of the biggest studies cases that make a lot of policies like the UNDRIP in 2007. So this is the case of Chad-Cameroon oil pipeline. This oil pipelines was was a project that was from the World Bank. It was a development policy such that promised modernization and economic growth. This is reinforced for the World Bank. He found this project and presented as a model for responsible resource extraction that will foster economic prosperity for both Chad and Cameroon. Still, the practice demonstrates the failure of development policies to improve the lives of the local population rather than creating economic dependency, environment destruction, and human rights violation. The Chad-Cameroon oil pipelines was constructed between 2000 and 2003, over 1,070 kilometers to transport oil from Chad Doba camp to the Cameroonian coast for exportation. The project was conducted by ExxonMobil, Chevron, Malasa Petron, and among other multinational corporations, and it includes financial and logistic firms for World Bank. The modernization narrative planned the basis. Chad, one of the poorest nations in the world, was expected to use its oil revenues to invest in infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Foster long-term development. The participation of the World Bank was to ensure Chad's oil revenues were used toward poverty solution via the Transparent Revenue Management Program. This model was taken as an innovative strategy for solving the resource curse, a happening where developing nations struggle to convert the wealth into economic growth. So this is another myth too. So when the indigenous population gets to had some our West money, they cannot build this modernization as we saw it. So this was a resource course, has said, like when you support with the Western money, this indigenous population, they don't know what to do because they don't need it at the end of the day, right? So even with these promises, the project quickly revealed into neo-colonial intentions. Did financial pacts slowly favorite multinational companies with control decision-making at dictate revenue-sharing terms? Chad received only a fraction of total profit, with much of the wealth flowing out of the country into corporate and foreign government coffers. This reflects a pattern of economic dependency, where resource extraction in former colonialism primarily benefits external actors while hosting national remain forgotten. The social and environmental consequences of this project was the community along the pipeline routes particularly indigenous and rural population, experience displacement and environmental harm. In Cameroon, indigenous Bajeli, Pygmy, the indigenous community, were pushed off ancestral land without adequate compensation of alternative livelihoods, following deforestation, oil spills, and the loss of biodiversity. Local ecosystems were further devastated, threatening food and water sources for the community. The failure to effectively implement environmental and social protection, despite World Bank guidelines, shows how development projects prioritize economic gains over indigenous rights and ecological sustainability. The Chad Cameroon oil pipeline illustrates the fallacy of modernization in development policies. While it promises economic growth, it rarely benefits local population. Rather than attack poverty, such projects perpetuate neo-colonial economic domination through resource extraction, exacerbating the plight of affected communities. This situation underscores the need for more robust indigenous rights, protections, authentic participatory developments, and a transition from foreign control economy frameworks that sustain historical injustice. So this is my favorite part, that is the indigenous-led alternative. A lot of studies has shown how their alternative socioeconomic organization could be more sustainable than any program, any social program of the Western world. Indigenous governance models have provided a sustainable, community-centered alternative to Western development frameworks. The first indigenous community that will be considered developed were the ones that established complex socio-political systems, advanced agricultural techniques, and large-scale infrastructure showing high level of organization and sustainability. Among them, of course, the civilization of Mesoamerica, such as Mayas and Mexicas, stand out of their sophisticated governance structure, economic system, and architectural achievements. Rooted in traditional knowledge, collective decision-making, and environmental safekeeping, these models have prioritized long-term well-being over short-term economic gain. Across the world, indigenous communities have successfully implemented governance structure that reinforce self-determination while fostering social, financial, and ecological resilience. In South America, the Inca civilization provides another example of early indigenous development. The Incas create an extensive administrative system that managed a vast empire through a centralized bureaucracy, road networks, and unique economic models, the MITA, which organize labor contribution to state projects. Unlike Western monetary economy, the Inca system functioned on redistribution, where agricultural surplus and resources were managed collectively to prevent security. One of the most prominent examples of indigenous governance is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy in North of America. Established centuries before European contact, the sophisticated political system is based on a council of representatives from different nations who make decisions through consensus rather than majority rule. The Great Law of Peace, how they do the principles, emphasize unity, respect, and sustainability, have influenced the democratic governance model, including the U.S. Constitution. Today, the Haudenosaunee continue to govern their territories and advocate for indigenous sovereignty on national and international platforms. Another notable example of economic sovereignty in practice is the case of Zapatistas, movement in Chiapas, Mexico, which was successfully promoted indigenous economic autonomy since 1990s. According to Collier and Cuartielos in their book, Basta, Land and the Zapatista Rebellion of 2007, the Zapatistas was created a collective economic model based on communal land ownership, sustainable agriculture, and local self-sufficiency. By rejecting neoliberal policies and the privatization of land, the Zapatistas have built a strong network of cooperatives that support sustainable farming, artisan production, and local industries. This model of economic sovereignty has enabled them to resist exploitation and maintain a certain degree of independence from the capital economic system of Mexico state. The Zapatistas movement example how indigenous communities can establish alternative economic system based on solidarity, communal ownership, and environmental stewardship. Even though this example could be controversial, this resistance demonstrates the power of the community to separate the social organization from the Western ideology of society. To maintain idealist-led environmental safekeeping, scholars such as Linda Twyhan Smith, in his book Decolonization Methodologies of 1999, emphasized the need for legal recognition of indigenous land rights, financial support for indigenous conservation, initiative and integration of indigenous ecological knowledge into global environment policies. Governments and international organizations must collaborate with indigenous community to formulate and enact policies that safeguard sacred lands, advance sustainable development, and uphold indigenous sovereignty over natural resources. The implementation of this strategy will not only benefit indigenous population, but also enhance global initiatives aimed at biodiversity preservation and climate resistance. There is many examples. I will try to send you the whole document, but there is one particular community in Australia that they do firefighters, and by now the government implement their technique, because not the same government could like do how they do it. So many techniques, because they are in touch with the nature, they have the system, they have more experience than the Western the Western development society. They can create a better societies. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the policy recommendation. These policy recommendations are based on behavioral economics approaches. The complexity of designing a development policy for indigenous population must be addressed with methodologies that ensure effectivity of protecting indigenous land, rights, self-determination, and cultural preservation. Behavioral economics offers valuable insights into measuring how social norms, cognitive biases, and institutional structure influence decision makings. There are behavioral insights that could help create correct development policies and ensure proper application. I will refer now 4 different strategies that are made for creating different policies that could work in development areas. So choose architecture is a behavioral strategy for designing policies that direct decision without restriction freedom. So first of all, I think one of the biggest problems that this international organization has is that the core and the base of the approach is the Western ideology, right? So when you arrive to one place, you have to know how they manage. You have to do an analysis. You have to do a base of what they need, or not what we think they need. So that's the first approach, the choice architecture. What will be the architecture that you will choose to find a solution, right? Leverage social norms and trust-based governance refer to creating policies that resonate with the values or beliefs of society, influencing positive behaviors and increase acceptance of state decision-making. So this is basically how you approach the communities, and you have to create trust between. You have to know their values. You have to know how they manage the society, instead of imposing our religion or our way of governance. So this is very important, how to understand how they rule themselves. Loss aversion also plays a critical role in shaping policy effectiveness. Studies show that people are more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve gains. So here, for example, I remember a lot one policy that is one project that, of course, many are bad, but many are good too. There is one project that Casa Construyendo para mi país. There's a Chilean initiative that what they do is they don't go and give things. What they do is they go, they introduce the idea, they make the community pay for their houses. Is a significant pay, of course, but making them to pay, make them be part of the project, make them be part of the construction, and make them do an effort to really help their families. is what they need, not the Western ideology of development that I'm gonna go and give you money or give you what I think that you need of modernization, and that's it. So it's a complex. It takes time, but if we are gonna do it, it's better to do it well, right? Reducing cognitive load and increasing accessibility of information is another key behavior insight. Many legal and financial systems use complex language and bureaucracy process discourage indigenous participation. So it's basic. First of all, is a part of knowing with who are you talking, and then how are you talking with them, like the words that you're using, against people in your team for addressing the policies, for them to be more encouraged to participate on all these projects. These behavioral science strategies are helpful, although addressing the principle of indigenous identity-based governance and the decentralization governance approach is essential for drafting development policies for indigenous community. Western financial policies prioritize private or state interests focused on wealth accumulation and their primary objective. Contemporary policies often neglect the interests of indigenous community and the principle of collective economic security. Strategies like social norm reinforcement, default framing, accessible information, and culturally adapted financial models ensure that policy are theoretically sound, but also practically and impactfully. Practices such as livestock banking within the Maasai community ensure cultural continuity while fostering economic stability. Another like key information is that there was a project in India. What they find in general that women get a better financial project. They are good. They are better in financial administration. So it was a project of development that they give for a community, like you had to have like five women to get a load, and then you will pay every week, every month. And the idea was like the group, they will encourage each other to pay the load, right? So they will together be like encouraging to pay and to grow, to develop. But instead of creating a better reality for them, it creates for the society that they were part of, they were rejecting them because they were richer. So how they fail in the base of the first principle, right? To knowing the land, to knowing where you are applying and how they shape their society. And you are making, instead of giving development, you are making the people to be more discriminalized for their own people. So that's why it's very tricky to get into these public policies in indigenous population more, because it's different how they approach their views, their identities. So yeah, so I told already that I have just 30 minutes and then 10 minutes of question. I will close with my conclusion. So the essence of understanding of indigenous perspective and sovereignty by Western developing model have perpetuated the cultural disintegration, environmental destruction, and economic dependency. Despite international frameworks that purport to protect indigenous rights, such as the UNDRIP, the International Labour Organization, and the World Bank Environment and Social Framework, these institutions often serve as mere symbolic gestures without meaningful enforcement mechanisms. Development is not a neutral word, it's a myth, a narrative, a tool of power, establishing alternative governance models that prioritize economic sovereignty and environmental protection demonstrate the capacity of indigenous community to innovate, be resilient, and adapt. Decolonized development is a necessary action for global sustainability and social equity, providing indigenous people recognition as supporting models that offer a viable alternative to the exploitation system that dominate Western society. Without reforms that consolidation, the independence of indigenous community, the traditional world will face dispossession and marginalization. Under the guise of development, it needs respect and recognition of indigenous sovereignty for a just and sustainable future. Thank you very much for listening.
No, thank you, Michelle, for this very interesting talk. We'll start with the questions now. We'll just wait a little bit to see if someone sends a question. For instance, first, Dr. Del Rio asks, in your opinion, is it possible to have an international cooperation without asymmetry? What would be needed to change to get that?
I think, of course, there is, as I say already, there is many that are good, that they have good intention and they have good path, but there is a lot of that they are not, right? I think one of them that is the World Bank, that the World Bank is one of the most criticado how they operate and how are the alliance that they had with this community. Of course, it has to be for me. It's a matter of time, right? And good strategies. There is many strategies. How I already addressed some of the ones that behavioral economics give has tools, but I think every tool depends of the community. That's the thing, right? Because it's not having a general practices. It is, of course, you address fast general practice, but then like the second little step is, and it's the biggest step, is which is the community, where, how they work, how they address. So I think one of the things that will give a powerful policy is giving more time to understanding the community, to understanding their needs and their language, their culture, to know how to address what they need. So that would be more like, for me, the key is to go and learn which community do you want to understand and want to develop in a way, and then you can understand them. If you don't understand them, you cannot help them.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. How does your legal training shape your critical perspective on international cooperation policies?
Is my comprehension in legal studies is for example, all the legal framework that is given is from these three big institutions, these three organizations. But in my legal framework, it depends of the local areas. We have we have to watch which independence, but it is a principle that we have all these institutions that already recognize them. And I think one of the keys is the IKS, that I think that will be the further investigation and supporting on legal aspects.
Okay, thank you. Then this is another question. They say from YouTube, thank you for the talk. They think it's a very powerful idea, the imposed development to reforms that has been making kind of making a statement of the colonial dynamics. In your experience, how could we make either from academy or some communal spaces a real change, thinking how to design better public policies, especially when the institutional frameworks are reproducing the same logic or the same ideology?
For me, I think one of the powerful things that will probably change everything is introducing to our organization these communities, right? So, for example, in Mexico, we already have a lot of governance that they are indigenous. So giving the opportunity for them to talk out, to be part of the organization, not just or their organization or the community, not just the national organization of different countries, that will make the difference for recognize them and embrace their culture. And I think that we are in a world very Western ideology. Their knowledge will help everybody and will make us live and create and identify ourselves much better. So it's like introducing them to the organization of the society, not just other communities, more like on the national atmospheres.
Sorry, Farid, your microphone is closed.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. How can behavioral economics contribute to the design of more context-sensitive and equitable policies?
I think one of the more the powerful tools of behavioral economics is that they focus of analysis more than, for example, in just law approach. First, you saw your rules and then you apply it. In here, first you analyze. First, you have like for example, like the first one who is having a choice architecture. First, you have to have an analysis of all the ground, and then you action. So I think one of the beautiful things of behavioral economics is that they are based on statistics too. So they are based on the scientific method more than, for example, me being a lawyer and I'm based off what I think is good because my constitution says so. But in behavioral, they say, okay, I want to do a study, and then I will see what is better. So I think that's a very good apportation that behavioral economics give.
Okay, thank you. There's another YouTube question. They say that listening to you made them wonder how can we heal that harm that the quote unquote development has caused in our communities, and how can law be part of that healing?
Understanding better our communities, I say, getting more the approach of I want to help you. No, I want to learn from you. I think that's one of the biggest approach that Western society has with indigenous community is, oh, what can I help you? Why I need to help you? You are much better than us. You are surrounded of nature. You are free of economic rat race, you know? And so I think of the approach of how we look the community, indigenous communities, and how the approach of communication that will be like the path, right? Like what is development for us and what is development for you? Like you don't need a building. You need, of course, for example, we need the basis of dignity. We need the basis of food, the preservation of the lands. So I think will be first the communication, the approach of identity of not what can I do for you, of what we can learn together. And the second of all, respect of their land, respect of their identity, and embrace them, you know, like not saying, try to learn Spanish. No, let's communicate. Like, let me try to learn your language too, right?
Thank you. There's another question. It says, how can we reconcile the emotional and cultural trauma caused by the imposed development policies with the technical need for legal reform? And is there any space within public policy to truly center healing and collective memory?
I think there are some centers now. I think it's a subject. When we we're working in the Congress actually for even help them to help us. They help us. They help us to develop a lot of, for example, laws on apiculture. And so I think that's healing when you introduce yourself to them and then them introduce to you, and they, instead of seeing them as an external, seeing them as these communities that they are with a lot of knowledge of things that we used to, but now we don't know because we are just in our commercial and economical view. So one of the things that we did in the Congress was very rich, and I loved it, was that they help us to understand better the apiculture and how to professionalize all this.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Torrio asks, do you think is there or would there be a more respectful way to collaborate with communities? Would they be involved? How would they be involved? From how could we involve them from the definition of problems and the ways to solve those problems that are defined?
For me, is giving them the opportunity to speak up. I think many of the communities, they still on dissertation. They still very far from where the decision making are taking place. And first, enriching the information, of course, let them know how, for example, we see this in Chiapas. I have a lot of, I went many times to Chiapas to see all the communities, and sometimes they believe that they are wrong to be indigenous, right? So I think that's the main point first, to make them embrace their culture, make them embrace their origins and not lost it, because if they lost it, we are all lost. So one of the things is giving more information, more channels for them to speak up and to embrace them community, to tell them that is not bad that they are indigenous, even though it is much better. They are richer than us. So I think one of the ways is giving them channels to speak up and creating obviously these programs, even though sometimes they, instead of helping, they colonize. But I think the approach of trying to give them trying to maybe connect with us more than give, is connect, is finding a purpose together.
Okay, and we've got another question. It says, what does an engineer need to learn or to propose any technological solution that it's in line with the capabilities of different communities?
That's amazing. For example, this Dr. Luis Montiel, he's an engineer. He's an engineer of decision makings. So that's what he does. He does trees of decisions. So that's why I get involved with him in studying, because even though he was just formulas and more like economic approach, when we get together to analyze this, we get the social part, right? And I think behavioral, you being an engineer, maybe having the approach of economic behavioral economics gives a lot of sense, because they do a lot of economic statistics, economic formulas, and they apply into the society. So you can learn how to create a project through understanding the society, but at the same time doing calculations. So I will tell you to read Richard Thaler. There is this book that is based on for public policies, that is Notch. That Notch in English is like the little push. So is how you can create through different strategies policies that extend the freedom and the choices of the society. So reading more of behavioral economics, I think, includes a lot of engineering and the society by itself.
That's very interesting. And I've got a final question, and it says, so you've been working in public policy in Mexico, and then you've done a little bit of that work or research here in the United Kingdom. Have you seen any key differences in how it is approached back in Mexico and here in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, sure. Of course, the priorities are different, and the subjects that we are interested are totally different. So, talking about indigenous, here in UK, you don't have a lot of like indigenous population, right? You are more focused on economic growth. And here, for example, the system in general is totally different. So here more, and now I'm seeing more labor and migration, and in that is very different too. We have, even though that now is exclusion policies, you have more rights for the people who are coming and more clear policies. I think the way how they do the policies, that is not a law by itself, but it's like a consensus and depends of where are you, gives a little bit more of good approach of the ground of each places. So is very different. Like all the law is common law and civil law. We are a society the same, but the priorities are totally different. So I think the difference will be the priorities. We have in Mexico another kind of interest, and here is more about economic growth.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Michelle. And I'm conscious of time, and if there's not another question, I would like to thank you very much for this very interesting and thoughtful presentation, Michelle. I hope we can see a little bit more of your work, rather in a PhD or some published papers. Thank you very much for this presentation again, and I'll pass over the microphone, so to speak, to Dr. Del Rio.
Thank you very much, Farid.
Thank you very much, Farid. Thank you very much, Michelle. And to the community of the seminar, we will have a space and we will be here in next September. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ciao. Thank you very much for the space.